What's going on, guys? We are coming in here with our next portion of the Beastmen roster breakdown, and we're in the strongest portion of their options here. I do have a few cav and or not cav, but like monsters and war beasts in here, but they fill like complementary roles or very similar roles to the other units that were already in here. Um, I want to cover like the actual monsters and beasts on the Beastman roster in their own right. These are like pseudo cav or like cav supporting type of units, so I just wanted to throw them in here to talk about them. But without further ado, we'll just get right into it, and we'll start off with the Warhound variants. They're not good. Like, they're not completely useless. I mean, arguably, in terms of combat prowess, we can flip over. We'll get into them now. They just stink. They don't really do anything. You see, like, the only difference between them is the poison available to the 450 variant. But they have terrible leadership. They don't have a ton of HP. Only 6,000 on 80 models is pretty squishy. You compare that to a Razorgore herd, which has more health on 32 models. And we'll get the Razorgore herd in a little bit, and I'll talk about them. But just at a glance, this is a pretty weak unit. Like, they just fall apart the second they get into combat. It's very rare that they actually get you any value by line breaking and then following up with any kind of other units charge, because these guys are going to run away in the time that it takes or something to close the gap. The only thing that Warhounds are good at is they're good at chasing stuff off the field. So bringing like one into your army, like a Chaos Warhound with poison, can also like maybe hound down a enemy skirmish unit, depending on what it is. And then you can maybe catch it with like a Centigore or something, thanks to the poison. It's 450 gold investment though for that kind of a role, and it's just sketchy. These guys need a little bit of love. Like, get them up to 45 leadership, and I think they'd be a pretty reasonable unit. It's not like they do a ton of damage anyways. Yeah, not a lot of notes to put in here on these guys. I mean, they chase stuff off the field, and that's it. Bring like one. Just like a poison Warhound. The poison's like decent little utility if you can like throw them in under the feet of some Centigors or some other unit. Just because, Beastmen don't have a ton of poison available to them. Like, the Spawn have them. The Groghooves have poison. That's like really it. Pestigors as well. So having like some source to slow down speed and weapon strength can be nice. At a very discounted rate. But the issue is, again, that they just don't stick around all that long, so it tends to fade in importance when you're just talking about trying to do damage, where the Beastmen just have so many good units that can value trade for you. These guys just get lost in the sauce, and all the Mortal Hound variants are just not very good in general. So, no more notes about them. Harpies honestly aren't a terrible unit. You don't see them very often. I mean, I think that there's a good reason for that, is, Beastmen are generally pretty good at getting on top of missile units anyways. That's really what Harpies are good at. They're not an amazing unit, but they are fairly comparable to Furies in a lot of ways. Like, they're a Mortal Fury, essentially. They're 150 gold cheaper than the demonic unit that I'm referring to. They don't have a lot of damage output, and they're slower, which is a problem. They don't have physical resist or anything. They've got, like, the exact same weapon strength, though, funnily enough. But they've got good melee defense at 38. These guys are really meant to like fly down and just occupy a fairly expensive missile unit that you can't get on top of with something that's like higher damage output. As opposed to like Warhounds, where I think adding one in is incredibly speculative. A Harpy, you can throw one in and use it pretty aggressively when you're trying to open up early engagements. They can definitely get something done. They're not a great unit in most circumstances. Like, they really are just a tar pit for like a missile unit that you can't afford to leave unoccupied. But at that role, they're fairly okay. I mean, they got reasonable leadership. 52 is actually better than a Fury. The speed is not great. The melee attack isn't that great. But if they are hitting stuff, you know, they're doing okay damage because of the weapon strength. The melee defense means that they usually have to be peeled off. Most missile units don't have enough melee attack to be able to actually kill these guys and get rid of them. So that's where Harpies can find a little bit of success. They're better than you might think at a glance. And in terms of like their actual value trading, they're not really a value trade unit. They're just there for a little bit of a situational annoyance that can hold in for a little bit. Alright. Moving on to Razor Gore Herd. I mean, Razor Gore Herd are just absolutely insane. They are so good. And with the cost increases to the Centigor Great Weapons, these guys are your premier AP anti-heavy cavalry piece on the Beastmen roster. They hit hard as hell. They're like little miniature refrigerators, like charging into battle. They are meaty as hell. They got 1,500 mass. They got a reasonable amount of HP with 6,100. You compare them to like a Fleshhound, right, on the Khorne roster. And Fleshhounds are really strong units in their own right, in a lot of ways, but Best Gore Herd, same HP, same number of models. Razor Gore Herd have more armor. They've got less leadership, but honestly, that's not that big of a deal. I don't know why Fleshhound's weapon strength tooltip is so funkily displayed as opposed to the Razor Gore Herd. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Really where they lose out against Fleshhounds is like speed, melee attack, melee defense, little bit of weapon strength, but they make up for that by having a majority AP damage, and they got 46 charge bonus. And they have a shit ton more mass than Fleshhounds. Fleshies only have 450 mass. Each individual Razor Gore Herd has 1,500. Best tar pit unit on the roster, in my opinion. They're cheap. They actually do quite a bit of damage to SEs if they surround them, thanks to their really strong AP weapon strength. They cause fear, and they have Strider. These guys actually shred units that are trying to creep up on you through trees. They're actually really good at engaging in forests. Centigors are slowed down and lose stats when they're in trees. Razor Gore Herds, because of the Strider, don't even care about that. They just get in there and they just do nasty work. They're a really fun unit to use also. Cannot recommend these guys enough. They are great. They are, they can be countered by other similarly costed units in like cavalry sections, so like Illyrian Reavers, units of that caliber do tend to like just trade evenly into them. Razor Gore Herd, they're a core unit. You probably want to bring like 2 in most matchups, and you want to send them in onto the field to uptrade into like Silver Helms, Dragon Princes, Cold One Knights that actually do really well against. Funnily enough, units of that caliber and type is really where the Razor Gore Herd will just make so much bank for you in the value trade department. It is incredible. They do have Feral Rampage, so they rampage for 40 seconds when they hit 75% of their HP, and again at 25%. So you've got to be careful of them getting poked out and then rampaged, because their leadership's low enough, they will probably end up getting killed at that point. If you can avoid that, though, and just get them to like charge into stuff, they just shred it. They hit so hard, man. And if you can get like 2 good cycle charges off the Razor Gore herd, it's very easy to get 600 gold back on these guys. Incredible, incredible utility on this unit. Alright, Tuskgore Chariots. Tuskgore Chariots are okay. There's just a much better option on this roster that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. You probably already know what it is. I mean, you can take a wild guess, right? But they still are alright. They're not a bad chariot in terms of like what they do and the kind of damage that they're capable of putting out. They're 750 gold. You can bring more of them than you can the Razor Gore chariot, which is the one that I'm referring to, of course. You know, these are a little bit easier to spam out onto the field, and if you just bring a ton of them, you can definitely do some pretty nice damage with them. And they can be a real nightmare for your opponent's infantry corps if they're not really prepared for it. They facilitate a very mobile playstyle for the Beastmen, which Beastmen already do really well. But you can start thinking about cutting like your dual weapon Gore herd if you're bringing Razor Gore or bringing a bunch of Tuskgore chariots. The only reason I wouldn't recommend like throwing a bunch of these out on the field, the chariot cap on the Beastmen is actually fairly restrictive. It's up to a maximum of 4, and you know, you've got quite a few characters that can come in on chariots, and the character chariots are honestly pretty decent. I talked about them before. Kazrak especially is very strong on it. You do want your Great Bray Shamans to be on chariots so that they can not get killed and just dove by whatever combat character your opponent has. Wargors, their chariots can work, not great, and then there's like Bray Shaman and Beast, so usually the chariot restriction also makes it kind of hard to bring Tuskgores in. You can use these guys though if you really want to, and they will value trade fairly well for you. They've got a reasonable amount of HP. Their leadership is okay at 60. Fairly strong armor. Pretty quick at 70 speed. Melee attack, melee defense, pretty in line with a lot of other chariots. Nothing to turn your nose up at. They get Primal Fury, so they get extra melee attack. Their weapon strength is mostly armor piercing, and they got a good bonus versus infantry with a nice, juicy charge bonus of 64. So they can definitely get the value back pretty quickly. But yeah, we'll get to the Razor Gore chariot. We will get to that unit. There's a lot more to talk about the Razor Gore chariots as opposed to the Tuskgores. Oh, and the one last thing, Tuskgore chariots have Vanguard, so you can use them to get out on the field a little quicker than the Razor Gores, which don't have that. But yeah, that's about it. Cool unit, reasonably strong. Just a little outclassed and kept out of a lot of builds just because of you know, unit cap restrictions more than anything. Centigors core unit, easy peasy. In fact, we'll put all the units that I consider core Centigors up here, and we'll go through them one by one. You might be wondering why I don't have Centigors of Tzeentch, Centigoros, or the Great Weapon Centis up in here. We will talk about them, fear not. I just really want to get into the units that I think are maybe a little bit easier and more, a little bit more specialized in terms of like providing a role for the Beastmen that they do really need and doesn't have another option that competes with them for a very similar role and function. So just the standard Centigore is 800 gold. You know, they've been going up in price now for a while. I think 800's a very reasonable place for Beastmen. For Centigores. They've got quite a bit of health, actually. 6,700 is pretty reasonable for a cavalry unit. You gotta like Kossovite Dervishes, and they actually have way more HP than the Kossovite Dervishes do. So they're actually fairly beefy for a cavalry unit, which they do kind of need because they're, you know, fairly expensive and also don't have a lot of armor. You can see here, yeah, Illyrian Reavers, they have almost the same amount. They have a little more HP than Silverhelms, actually. So there's a lot to like there. just on the HP front. With 60 models, they got good mass at 950. Definitely very good at tar pitting stuff. They got a shield, blocks 30% of fire. Armor is nothing to speak of. It's pretty low. They can get kited out by skirmish cavalry pretty aggressively. You do want to try and not chase stuff all that much with Centigors. Centis are there to bring home the heat once the front lines engage. These guys are your hammer unit. Beastmen have, like, Zangors and some of their little deceptively durable infantry to anvil. And then you just follow that up with Centigors, and they just shock damage everything into oblivion. They've got perfect vigor with Rowdy. And Primal Fury is usually active. These guys only have 60 leadership, but that's fairly reasonable for a cavalry unit of this type. Especially if it's a unit that has perfect vigor. They're a real nightmare to shut down in the mid-game. That's usually where you can develop out a handful of these guys onto the field and just terrorize your opponent. God, Centigors. Such a good unit. I do think 750, I mean, they were 700 not even all that long ago, and then they got 750. Now they're at 800, and I really think this is the sweet spot for them. They're very micro-intensive. Beastmen are an incredibly tough faction to execute well. They're a top tier, but they're not as forgiving as, say, Ogre Kingdoms and Slaanesh, who are a little more durable, have a little bit more access to, like, armored units, and also either have, like, heals, like the Ogre Kingdoms do, or Slaanesh, which just has flat ITP, Strider, and a bunch of other ridiculous stuff on all of their units across the board. Beastmen, they're great, but they are a little bit more honest than those factions. Which is why I think the price increases have really kind of brought them more in line. So you don't just see, like, Centi swarms anymore like you used to. Like, you could do that, but the extra, like, 50, 25 gold across the board on all of their variants does make it a little bit harder to, like, cram them into your builds now. You have to be a little bit more deliberate with your unit choices with this roster now. And I do think that, you know, you want, like, 2 or 3 of these guys, typically. 2,400 to spend on your mobility is pretty reasonable. Like I said, they have the perfect vigor, and they hit really hard with the charge bonus. They've got those, like, nice slender models, so they just pile into combat really well, and they're awesome. They're fun as hell. They got Vanguard. That speed is really 92 speed, thanks to Primal Fury. Anything else that's worth talking about the standard Centigor? Not really. Keep them away from heavy cav, and they'll do wonders for you. Just find flanks and get those charges, man. That's how you get the value with these guys, and they're really good at chasing stuff down, too. Like, you get lots of leadership breaks as the Beastmen, because you can just, like, run over units, do a bunch of shock damage to them. You got lots of stuff that causes fear. You've got reasonable access to terror-causing stuff as well. And then you got stuff like Doom and Darkness on, like, Malagor, which can break leadership, and then the Centis can just farm value chasing stuff around and killing them as they try to flee. That's really where the Beastmen get a lot of their value from, is just how good they are at running stuff down. Keeping it dead and good and dead, I should say. Centi, throwing axes, the standard variant, and the Grog Hooves are amazing units. These guys are an absolute nuisance to run into. The standard throwing axes are just a regular Centigor. They do lose a decent amount of HP. 840 HP lost is kind of brutal. But, they, of course, have the throwing axes, which do a ton of damage. They've got a decent amount of HP, or, not HP, ammunition at 14. 70-meter range is pretty short, but all the throwing axes are like that. You know, you compare them to the Marauder Horsemen of Khorne. Fairly similar unit in terms of performance, but the Goreherd, or the Centigors, I should say, have, 60 leadership, as opposed to 48 for the Marauder Horsemen. which means that these guys hang in combat a little bit better than their Marauder counterparts, which I think is really what like tips them over the edge in those fights. Oftentimes, they've got like a little bit better weapon strength over everything other than the corn throwing axes. And they really can dominate most of the chaos skirmish game. In matchups where your opponent's going to have a bunch of missiles, they tend to fall off, just because they're so short range, but still having one or two for big monsters is a really good call, because Beastmen, they can deal with large monsters fairly well with a lot of their own monstrous units, and even with just like Ungor Raiders and Gorbles and units of that type. But being able to poke at range against, like, dragons, you know? Dragons are a little tough for the Beastmen to deal with otherwise. They don't have a lot of units that can touch dragons in the air outside of the throwing axes. Just for that, that gives them a very important niche on this roster. And then, of course, like I said, in matchups where your opponent's not bringing a bunch of, like, archers or skirmish cav archers, the Centis outclass most of the other Marauder cav variants in melee prowess, and can even skirmish reasonably well at range and do some nice work there. So, just great to have. Great to have around, man. And the Grog Hooves of Wolf's Run, 300 gold more expensive than the standard Centigor throwing axes. You're paying $11.25 for these guys. You might be thinking, good golly, why? Why would you do that? You know, that's an expensive-ass unit. But the reason why simply is because these guys have a heal on their Rowdy variant. They get Drunken Bravado instead, which gives them regeneration, basically. Regeneration without the weakness to fire. They've got poison throwing axes as well. And they've got poison melee attacks. They've got better leadership, which means that Primal Fury and Drunken Bravado are up more often, and they just have, those better ROR stats on the melee attack and melee defense. And these guys, they can easily get you that value back, just with the throwing axes if you're using them against the right kind of targets. But I'm telling you, like, these guys, the utility they provide by sticking around on the battlefield and soaking up damage in skirmish phase of games is really awesome. Like, they could run in under some missile fire, throw off a volley at a high-value target, and then peel out to go regen, and they'll probably only lose a couple models, and then they just sit back and heal. They'll use all their ammunition up. They'll usually get you about 800-900 value, which is fairly standard for units of this type. But the mobility, the advantage that they give you, even when they're out of ammo, it cannot be underestimated. These guys hit like a truck in melee combat. And because they've got perfect vigor and have, honestly, almost better stats, I mean, they really do have better stats than standard Centigors, outside of the charge bonus. With the poison, they are a nasty little piece to have out on the field. No matter what the scenario is, they can very easily get you 2,000 value if your opponent does not dedicate something to try and shut these guys down, and are just deceptively strong, man. Like, I love the Grog Hooves. One of the best RORs in the game. I don't see anybody bring them. Stop discounting these dudes, folks. This is a borderline OP unit. Like, just, you can only bring one, and everybody who plays the Beastmen, or plays against them, I should say, should really thank their lucky stars that that's the case. Because if you could bring more than one Grog Hooves, Beastmen would be absolutely unstoppable, in my opinion. I mean, they're good against expensive monsters, and then they can just, like, hammer against chaff all game thanks to their regeneration and perfect vigor, man. They don't fall off at any stage of the game. Good from wire to wire. Alright, so we've talked about all of our Centi variants that I think are good in, like, 90% of matchups. We'll get into the other variants now. I'm skipping over the Razorgore for a moment, just so I can get through the Centigors, because I've already talked about the other ones. I might as well talk about these guys. They're all strong. They all fill a little bit of different niche role from one another. I do think that the Centigore of Tzeentch is a little stronger, but they do cost a mark. And they are 1,200 gold. That's pretty pricey. They can definitely get you that back, though. We'll flip over. We add them all onto the board here. We'll start with the humble Great Weapon Centigore. Pretty similar in terms of stats to the standard Centigore variant. They got a little more weapon strength with a much better AP split. They lose a little melee attack and melee defense, which is unfortunate, but they've got, fairly beefy HP, of course, as I mentioned before, with 6,700. They cost 1,000 gold, which is pretty pricey nowadays. Really have to be on top of your micro if you're going to use the Centigore Great Weapons. But for 1,000 gold, they can definitely get you that. They can definitely get that back pretty quickly, and they're really good into factions that are bringing either heavily armored infantry, like Warriors of Chaos or Khorne. And they're also fairly decent into factions that have big monsters or chariots, because the Centigore Great Weapons pile into combat really well against units of that type. With their strong charge bonus and the good weapon strength, they'll shred stuff like that in no time flat. It's pretty incredible, That's really where these guys shine. They're good against Bretonnia. Just because Bretonnia can bring a lot of heavy cav, you can't just use Razorgore Herd against them. You do want the Centigores to be a little bit quicker and respond a little bit faster. And just being able to equal, like, Bretonnia in the mobile game can be really nice. Also good against the Empire. Empire can shoot these guys down, though. They are fairly squishy to shooting of any kind, just because, of course, they don't have a shield. They don't have a lot of armor either. Against factions with good range, they can fall apart pretty quickly. So you do have to be very careful of that. But that's really about it. Like Fata Buna, Melkoths, Usirians, spell types, or spells of that type can do a lot of damage to these dudes. So you do need to be a little careful of those type of spell casts. But on the whole, just an incredible unit for the price, with, fair trade-offs that you gotta take into consideration when building your armies. Centigors of Tzeentch are, like, the exact same unit, like, literally the exact same, but they get Arcane Charge, they get magic attacks, and they get a Protoss Shield. So for 200 gold, they're way easier to use than the Centigore Great Weapons, just because these guys can run in under missile fire to get a charge off and then get away. So if your opponent's going to bring a bunch of, like, archer-type units, Centigors of Tzeentch can definitely do stuff that the regular un-Tzeentchified variant is not going to be able to do nearly as safely. Arcane Charge gives them more weapon strength. Not that they need it, but them getting it is really awesome. These guys get kind of silly if this Arcane Charge is buffed all the way up on them. And just a rip and tear type unit, man. Very micro-intensive, but high risk, high reward type of gameplay. Is the Beastmen's bread and butter. And it's just fun, man. Fun as hell. Alright, last but not least, Sons of Goros. Now, the Sons of Goros are an odd unit. I don't use them all that often, but I really think I should start playing around with them a little bit more. They're an ROR, Centigore Great Weapon. Just like the Centigore of Tzeentch, they've got magical attacks, so really, they're 50 gold more, but they've got much better combat stats, as you can see. They've got more armor also, which is really nice. Like, 70 armor is actually pretty juicy. These guys are much more resilient under missile fire for not that much more when you really consider it. They're a pretty good unit. Like, they can definitely hammer against big monsters and heavy cavalry really nicely. Hold up a little better thanks to the armor values they've got. Better combat stats as well makes them quite strong. They've also got Guardian. Guardian's not that great, but it is nice to use these guys to support, like, Wargors or Gorbals who might be fighting something much bigger than them and need a little bit of assistance. The Sons of Goros can come in, do that, and give some Fizz Res to those characters. And then if you do have, like, a Malagor or a Great Bray Shaman, and you need those guys to get a little bit of help, the Sons of Goros come in and can do just that. Very nice unit. Very good at countering ethereals. Good against a lot of demon units. Good against any kind of armor. And are solid, man. Just damn solid. I don't use them much, but you know, I definitely think there's some matchups where I haven't been using them that I think I probably should be and would probably be having a little bit of extra success if I were using these guys. So I will keep y'all posted if my opinion changes on these dudes. But in the few games that I have actually played around with them extensively, they've been more than good. You know, I mean, they can just, they either trade their value back very well, or they uptrade. And that's the mark of a strong unit in a nutshell, just to, like, put it plain and simple. And they're not really outclassed by really anything. Like, the only thing that holds back the Great Weapon Centigors now is that Razor Gores can do the same job for a much cheaper price. You bring the Centigors if you want something with a little bit more speed, and you need to, like, disengage a little bit more cleanly against certain types of units. And the Razor Gores obviously have the Feral Rampage, which can hold them back a little bit, so that's why you want a, like, maybe 1 or 2 Centi Great Weapons in your build in the right kind of matchups. So, you know, play around with them and give it a spin. Razor Gore Chariots are our last unit here for this video. Absolutely insane, dude. This is the best chariot in the game, I think. It hits like a freaking truck. The Razor Gore herd, they may be mini refrigerators running around the battlefield, but a Razor Gore chariot is a 18-wheeler, man. These things just hit infantry and leave them a bloody smear. There isn't a single infantry unit, I don't think, in all of my time using Razor Gore chariots that has really been able to properly stop these guys on the charge. Corn Gores are probably the closest thing to being a threat to the Razor Gore chariot in terms of an infantry-sized model. Razor Gore chariots on the charge, if they have all 4 models, they'll be taking like 20% of a unit's HP out on the charge, which is pretty gross. It's insane. And if you get a side charge on a unit that's, like, locked in combat already, they do even better. They can feasibly take out half the HP on a infantry unit. And because their weapon strength is so high, with such a good charge bonus, they're actually just outright killing models of infantry as they drive through them. It's really gruesome. Unit is kind of wild, and they do a great job of busting through front lines and giving you access to archer lines, and just wreaking havoc on Dark Shards, Lothern Sea Guard, regular High Elf archers, even, like, Wood Elf archers tend to struggle against these because they're fast, dude. I mean, 77 speed, they can easily run over Way Watchers, easily flatten Glade Guard, Dryads. The Razor Gore Chariot is honestly good in every matchup. I don't think there's a single matchup where they're not good. It's just a question of how many you want to bring oftentimes. Like, against factions that have good mobility in their own right, like Khorne, Norska, Bretonia, Although maybe not that great in Bretonnia. Bretonnia doesn't have that much infantry that's really all that important to run over. Like Kislev is another good faction where these guys can get shut down by the mobility, but just bringing one in those kind of matchups can really help you out, because those factions do also have lots of infantry. The Razorgors are just so good at clearing both chaff and elites, like exceptional against elite infantry, and then also really strong at clearing hordes of chaff units, just because of that weapon strength and charge bonus, man. They also cause fear, so they can put some serious shock damage down. They lower leadership, and then you can follow up with some more units just hammering home and break leadership really quickly by playing in conjunction with the rest of your roster. Like, Beastmen are the ultimate combined arms faction. Like, any one area of the roster can get outclassed by something of equal value on another roster, typically. But when you start adding in, like, all of the synergies between the units and the way that they're complementing one another, that's what makes the Beastmen so good, because they're fast across the board. They have good charge bonus across the board. So really what you want to do is you want to, like, isolate units. You want to get damage with your infantry, preferably, as your anvil. Running in, getting that reasonable, like, charge bonus in the mid-20s off. Fixing them in place, smacking them around a little bit. If it's an infantry unit, you use your Razorgore Chariot to just absolutely flatten that unit. And probably put it to rout. And if it's in the mobile game, you use like your Razorgore Herd to take the charge, and then the Centigors come in from the flank and help finish that fight. Just combos like that, it's really not that complicated. But it is pretty micro-intensive to be able to, like, pull off these wombo combos. But if you're able to do it on a regular basis, that's how the Beastmen just dominate matchups. Beastmen have very few bad matchups in this game. They do have a handful. I think Khorne is pretty tough for them. Slaanesh is really rough. Warriors of Chaos is a pretty even one. They're not that good against undead factions either. The exception being Tomb Kings, where they are pretty good at shutting down what the Tomb Kings are pretty capable of excelling at normally. Beastmen are also maybe just a little better in those categories, and are able to really hound down the really expensive lords and stuff. Ogre Kingdoms are a little tough as well. Most everything else is either favorable or, even. Other rosters and factions definitely have tools to clear the Beastmen, but it becomes pretty tricky because Beastmen just play a very different style from most factions, and mobile-heavy gameplay. Mobile-heavy factions tend to do really well in Dom as a whole, and, I mean, that just fits the Beastmen to a T. I mean, they're faster than just about any other faction with everything. Like, all of their infantry gets to the battlefield quicker with, like, Vanguard and really good foot speed to begin with, and then, like, Centigors have, like, 90 speed, thereabouts. Their chariots are in the mid-70s. They've got pretty fast monsters in general, with the exception of the Cygors and stuff, but, these guys are like an artillery piece, so they do their own thing anyways. There's just a lot to love here, man. Micro needs to be really good to use the Beastie Boys, but the more you play around with them, the more acclimated you get to that faster-paced style of gameplay. And going back to other factions, things start to feel a lot slower and a little less responsive than the Beastmen are. So, yeah, I mean, and this particular section of the roster is really one of the highlights. It's where a lot of your best units lie. It's where a lot of the uptrade potential is, and where you can really strike fear into your opponent's hearts and really put them on the back foot with good play with all of these units that I've been talking about here today. Just moving back to the tier list itself now. Just like a quick run through one last time, just to like highlight what I'm trying to like talk about here and emphasize is that this is like your shock and awe section. Like these are your hammers that really carry the water for you damage wise more often than not. Like the infantry can value trade reasonably well, but with Centis, they can massively uptrade in your favor. And they are definitely the core of your army. And Razorgore Herd can do that also. Razorgore Chariots as well. Tuskgore Chariots, Harpies, situational units that do tend to get a little outclassed. The Chariots, just because Razorgore Chariots are way stronger. A little bit more durable as well. And there's pretty severe restrictions on the number of chariots that you can bring in the Beastmen armies nowadays. Can use them, though. Still worth something. Very good at value trading. And the Harpies, you know, they're good at jumping on missile pieces if you really need to. And just can't afford to leave something online. And are not going to be able to access it easily with Centigors or just by pushing through with your infantry. That's where a Harpy can really help out. But just like one or two at most in matchups is where you want to limit your exposure with these guys. Hounds are just bad for the most part. Like one to chase routing stuff can be nice. That way your Centigors don't have to do it as much. And then, yeah. Again, I'm going to hammer it home. Shock and awe, man. Shock and freaking awe. I think I'm going to leave it off here. You know, want to keep it fairly short. Not a whole lot else I can really say about these units. If you played the Beastmen and you've run into somebody who's like really good with the Beastmen, you've seen just what most of these units can do. I do think Razorgore Herd and the Chariots are not being given their due by a lot of people. But I'm gonna do it for sure because I'm telling you, Razorgore Herd can easily get you like 1200 value. Just get charging down a heavy cav. Razorgore Chariots can get you like 2000 value easily just by running over your opponent's infantry, and that can free you up to bring, you know, a little bit more durable infantry options like Zangors and stuff. As opposed to having to like really invest into like Bestigors, who I do think are a really good unit, but are, you know, a little risky. Bestigors can definitely get flattened. Zangors just hold the line so well, so if you can use them in conjunction with Razorgore Chariots to like break down units that Zangors might otherwise struggle with, then you've got really nothing to fear because you got really durable cap weight on points now. That can counter being shot off, which is what the Beastmen really struggle with, is just like hordes of missiles that can like gun down their lightly armored units. And Razorgores kill those units, and they can also enable Zangors to like soak up missile fire by running over Zangor counters in melee. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be it, guys. I appreciate y'all checking this one out. Go test these units out. Tell me what you think. And I will see y'all next time. Take care. Peace.